Welcome back to Coming Home Well, straight to the point. We have Dr. Paul Lawrence, former Undersecretary for Benefits at the Veterans Affairs. He's going to walk us through some of the neat things that are going on with the VA, but this time we're going to talk about something that nobody really wants to think about, but it's really important: death benefits. Like, what happens when you die and your family is trying to settle your estate, get you buried, all those things. But we're going to talk about death benefits, and I haven't really thought about it. I mean, I probably should. Everybody's always saying you should have a will, you should have all these things. And we don't, nobody likes to think about it, but there's some things you can do to make it easier for your families. And that's what Dr. Lawrence is going to talk with us about today. Welcome to the show, Dr. Lawrence.
Hey, it's great to be back with you. And just to kind of manage expectations, we're going to talk about sort of the getting buried part, right? There's a whole host of benefits around survivors, and we've talked about these before, but let's talk about the burial process of, the things that the VA can help veterans with.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something we don't even think about. It's I had to deal with it with family members, and all of a sudden you're like, this whole bureaucracy, even though I do this, it was a big challenge for me to deal with when we were
Sure.
burying my grandfather. And I was like, oh, how the heck does that work?
Right.
So how does it work?
Well, you found out. So let's kind of go high level before we jump into the details, right? If you think about the US Department of Veterans Affairs, right, the National VA, it's divided into three administrations. So we often talk about VHA, the Veterans Health Administration, the doctors in the hospitals. You and I have spent a long time over the last couple of years talking about the Veterans Benefits Administration, VBA, the benefits, the My GI Bill, and all the different things. Less well known, but equally important, is what's called the National Cemetery Administration, right? So it's the cemetery administration. Now, what's interesting is the undersecretaries, as you introduced me, I was the undersecretary for benefits. There's the undersecretary for health, but the undersecretary at the National Cemetery Administration is the undersecretary for memorial affairs, reflecting the sense of honoring this last part of the journey for veterans. Okay, so it is smaller, but it is, very, very important. Okay, so manpower, I think probably like 2,500 employees, whereas the Veterans Health Administration has like 350,000. So it gives you order of magnitude. But what's really important is they maintain and run, I think it's like 130 national cemeteries. Okay, and these are some of the best run things in the country. Just to kind of give you a perspective, I'm sure you and your audience is familiar with the ASCI scores, right? The American something customer American Service Customer Institute or something like that. Um, they go around and measure things. How good are things? And on a 1 to 100 scale, the automobile industry is a
Like the
62.
JD Power
Yeah,
rankings. And
it's like that. Only it's ACSI. Somebody can look this up and do it. But the point of it is, the National Cemetery Administration comes in at 97%. When they survey the customers, they are overwhelmingly happy. And believe it or not, it is the highest score net across all industries, across all organizations. So this is a really well-run organization that deals with the last part of the veteran journey. Okay.
that means they must be doing something awesome. If any part of the VA is getting scores like that,
Yes.
never mind any other part of the government, but especially the VA, because there's always somebody going to be complaining about something, even when it goes well.
Right.
If they're getting 97%, they must be taking care of families quite well.
Yeah, and that's probably the big headline. So as you think about this thing, this last part of the journey, you're going to bury a loved one, honor and bury. Like, what are your options? Well, you can have, let's say, him in this example, him or her buried at a national cemetery run by VA. Now there are relationships with state cemeteries. Let's not get into that. It gets a little more complicated, but let's think about the VA cemeteries. What they try to do is have a cemetery within 75 miles of your home for 95% of the veterans. Okay. So that is generally true, though you can imagine places out west where it's not by virtue of whatever. Okay. But it's generally designed to be within 75 miles of your home so that you can sort of get there and do whatever. Okay. And so basically you have sort of two options. You can be buried in a VA run cemetery. Okay. And that will be no cost to the veteran. Now, to be eligible, of course, everything is an eligibility determination thing. Okay, but basically for a veteran, you just don't want to get a dishonorable discharge. Okay, you can go through and look at all the things and we'll talk about, are you eligible? But family members can be eligible. And there's a whole bunch of different circumstances like that. But for the veteran, not a dishonorable discharge. Okay, so
That's
that's really
pretty
the big one.
straightforward.
Pretty straightforward, but you can look at all the details and kind of do it. It's not designed to be hard. It's just whatever. So what does it mean? At no cost, they'll give you a plot, right? A grave site. They'll do what's called open and close it, right? Bear with me. Sort of dig it out, put you in, cover you up, right? You get the headstone, a flag, and the presidential memorial certificate, right? And they'll help you with all of this, right? And then in perpetuity, it will be maintained. So forever and ever and ever, these cemeteries are maintained. And again, if you ever have a chance to go to one, I went to a few before. They're incredibly well maintained. Okay, and even when VA would struggle when there were floods, right? Places were evacuated. Boy, burials and interments were taking place as soon as possible because people knew these were really important. Even visitation was arranged as quickly as possible. So they're very, very well run things. Okay. Now, a little bit of nuance here. We are not talking about Arlington National Cemetery. That is not run by the VA. That's actually run by the Department of the Army. Okay. So people want to go to Arlington National Cemetery. That's really not a VA thing. Okay. It's just different.
But it's a different process, but
yeah, it's just
we'll set that aside for now.
Yeah, but the VA cemeteries are, people are probably familiar with them nearby. Okay. The other thing too is that VA doesn't do ceremonies. So you say, hey, I want a ceremony. That's arranged by DOD. Okay. So there is an interface. Now, it isn't as hard as it sounds because most funeral directors are very familiar with all these processes. Okay. So they know, hey, you want to go to a VA cemetery? They know how to contact the VA cemetery. They know how to do this. They know how to arrange for all of that. Okay. So there's a lot of things that they'll do for you. So it's not completely, you're not completely on your own. Now, the one thing I wanted to have for you, let me see if I can find it real quick, is VA has a phone number. It's called the National Scheduling Office that handles all of this and people answer questions. So I want to be sure and give this number for you and your listeners. It's 800-535-1117, 1117. Okay. So if people have questions, this part of the organization answers questions all day long. In addition to scheduling, how do I do this? How do I do something? How do I do whatever? It's pretty straightforward. There is a caveat. You cannot make a reservation. Okay. So that's like the one big thing that people sort of ask, oh, well, can I? And no, you really can't. Okay. But
so it's not like a commercial place where you buy a lot and whenever it happens, you have that particular space.
That's
like if
that's
you
exactly
go out
right.
the local cemetery.
But there is one thing people can do now, and this is something I would encourage all your listeners, viewers to do, right? Which is you can do what's called a pre-need eligibility determination. And what that means is right now you can go to va.gov and simply Google pre-need eligibility determination. You can enter the relevant information, your DD-214, your situation, kind of whatever, and they will come back and tell you whether you are eligible to be buried in a VA cemetery. And this is tremendously important because I know you and I have talked about what happens when someone passes. It's a difficult period. The loved ones are experiencing loss and the like. And this is another process. If you can do this pre-need eligibility determination, you don't have to deal with at that moment. Okay. And a lot of people, based on their religious preference, based on their desires, will, have a loss and say, this person has to be buried quickly or within certain time periods or whatever. And that just really taxes the system to do. So you can do a lot by doing this pre-need eligibility determination. So maybe in the link or something, you can point this out. In fact, it's something I'd encourage you to do, Tyler, just to sort of see how it is, and you can report on that. That's really, really helpful. So then when the time comes, you're able to deal with that.
So this is just like when you go to apply for a VA mortgage, go get that certificate of eligibility before you even start, before you need it, the pre-need part. So you have the paperwork, it's already in place. So when you do call the 800 number for the scheduling, you've already got those things in place. So let's talk about what they do cover. So, the burial part, But obviously, there's a funeral director and all that. That is not part of that. That's a whole separate thing that you have to arrange. It's a private company or
Right.
whomever. But that burial plot and the gravestone, that's not including the casket or the viewing, and that's all separate, right?
That's all separate. That's right. Now, if you decide to go a different route, okay, you decide not to go to the VA and you end up paying for this all yourself, you can apply for a burial benefit. So this is actually administered by the Veterans Benefits Administration, okay? You could say, "Hey, I incurred these expenses, okay, and I'm eligible for a burial benefit," okay? Now, the challenge here is it's the amount of money is directed by law, and it is generally well below what an average burial costs. Okay, so I will tell you from my entire time in office, this was something everyone sort of petitioned for to raise the amount, and they knew inflation, just costs, and whatever were it was well below the average sort of funeral costs and the whole thing. So if you do go that route, there is some support, but it will probably come up short. So, you just need to like so much of end of life planning, need to take all this into consideration.
Now, I know this isn't things people want to listen to or talk about, but it's really important to take care of it, especially as veterans start to get older and you're dealing with your family. You want to make sure that they're taken care of. And this is just another way to make sure that they're taken care of if you're not there, if you're the veteran, that you've taken care of these easy things while you're still here, getting that pre-need certificate, figuring out what your wishes are and communicating them. That's another whole show, but that's part of this process and making sure that you understand what options are out there, like the VA cemeteries. They're all over the place. There's 130 of them. They can come visit and you can be buried and be honored for the rest of your life or the rest of time as they take care of it. So these are all really important things. Is there anything that we're missing? Anything that we should talk about the burial benefits?
No, but I guess I'd even take a step back though and say, this is something veterans have earned by virtue of their military service. Okay, so it does seem kind of like an administrative thing, but it actually is something that non-veterans don't get to experience. Right? That this is a special place. Right? We have hospitals, we have the GI Bill and special benefits. This is a special end of life thing, and so it's really sort of admission into a special club, right? If you will, that and forever it will be taken care of and the like. So it's just something special that think hard about it, and like you say, plan for these sort of things. It should be something that is celebrating the career of a veteran and whatever. So to the extent that you can plan in advance, you can look and see where all the cemeteries are. Again, you can't make a reservation, but you could imagine which ones you'd like to be in. So when the time comes and the like, you know, they're cool places to go see. Now, I will tell you something very special about it, okay? From time to time, there are folks who pass who they know who are veterans, but they have nobody to claim them. Okay. Those are brought to VA cemeteries, and every once in a while, sometime once a month, there are ceremonies where folks are buried, even though there's not a family and not that infrastructure. Okay. This generally gets out, and the cemeteries sort of announce it in such a way. They often have large crowds of veterans and family members simply come because they know what this really is, right? Is a veteran kind of, going through the last part of the process. So even if you sort of said, hey, I'm, don't know whatever, you might want to look at the nearby cemetery and talk about, hey, what happens when you have these ceremonies periodically for veterans who don't have a family and don't whatever. I mean, it's kind of moving to think about. I didn't see one, but I know I learned a lot about this, to think, lots of people show up. They have no relationship with, but they're there because they know how special it is. And that's something to think about too when you think about your end of life choices. So say it's a benefit, virtually no cost. You're right. There are some other costs, but they're virtually no cost. Care, special thing, the flag, the headstone, the presidential memorial certificate. I mean, it's a
It's a
pretty special
great
thing.
deal. I mean, if you've ever shopped or known somebody who's shopped and bought burial plots, they are not cheap and they're very expensive because they're counting decades of maintenance and all these other things into the cost. Pre is always better. So go check it out. We'll put up the link and we'll put up the phone number. Go spend just 5-10 minutes getting that pre-need eligibility and sort of figuring out what you want to do, and make sure you communicate it with your family members. Thank you for joining us on Straight to the Point, and we'll try to keep it straight to the point. So we're going to close now, but thank you so much for joining us on Coming Home Well.